Hi, welcome to the Authentically You podcast. I'm Dr. Julie Ducharme, back for another episode. And if you're listening for the first time, we get to interview people around the world who are doing authentic things. And I'm really excited today to have with us Carol. Carol is a first-generation child born in the United States with immigrant parents from Taiwan. She grew up experiencing freedom of the American culture along with deep-rooted traditions of Chinese culture, speaking both English and Taiwanese, and was both Presbyterian and Buddhist. Being a female in her culture and a child of the US with all its privileges, Carol was caught amid the clashing of two cultures and had to learn how to accept and integrate them both into her life. And wow, did she do that? With starting in 2012, she started the MotoVixens, a motorcycle track day organization. It was a mission to be inclusive of all riders, regardless of gender and race and religion, and without discrimination of the types of bikes they ride. We'll have to talk more about that. I didn't even know there was like a bike discrimination here.
Oh,
Mo-
yep.
MotoVixens also focuses on education, safety, community, camaraderie, and ensuring the preservation of the sport and championing women in motorcycling and other industries. She is also a model, an actress, a stunt woman, an author, a TEDx speaker, a voiceover actor, a racer, and has some signature line of products and reality show co-host of the Titan Evolution podcast. And we'll dive into those as well. But
Oh,
welcome
God.
to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we've gotten a chance to talk a little bit, obviously, on the Titan show and offline. And I've got to listen to your story a couple times. And I know there's so much to it, but you have really become a champion for women in a lot of different areas, which really excites me because when I think about empowering women, have I thought about motorcycles and stunt women yet? I haven't.
You haven't reached
And
that far yet, huh?
and that you've done this like later in life. This wasn't like when you were like 18 years old. Like you did this after you've had kids and a family. So I know we don't have a ton of time to do the entire backstory, but I'd love for you to give some of the backstory to our listeners of like, wait, hold on. Like you were a Baptist and a Buddhist, but you were a mom and now you're riding motorcycles. And you've got this whole MotoVixens club. And so I'd love for them to hear how this evolved.
It actually happened after my divorce. And I had two teenage boys, and I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? Right. But I think I surprised everybody. And like I said, we said this before the podcast started. Everybody thought that I lost my mind and I was having a midlife crisis. And I think, if anything, it was an awakening, because that so-called crisis they thought I was having was I had always played by the rules all these years. I was the good daughter. I did what I was told. I was a good mom, good wife, So when I had the opportunity to, kind of break loose of all of that, it was like, well, I'm still lost. I mean, I'm still back where I started when I was, 19, 20 years old. So I'm now in my 40s. I'm not going to say how old in my 40s at that time, but I was just like, okay, so if I'm going to still be here, I'm going to do something different. I mean, clearly it's not leading me down a path I want. So I had written a bucket list a long time ago, and I was just like, I've always wanted to ride motorcycles. I'm going to go ride a motorcycle. Terrified, absolutely terrified of it, and fell in love with it. I don't know. Maybe it was the being on the edge all the time that made you feel so much more alive.
Mm.
And there was a sense of freedom and peace that came with that. And next thing I know, I got really immersed in that community, and I saw how few women there were. And it kind of blew me away. And I was like, wait a second. Am I like one of like literally a handful of girls that rides motorcycles? And back then, over 10 years ago, I was. And I was also probably one of 3 or 4 girls, women, females that were either racing or instructing. And I can't tell you how many times I felt so, I don't know, like discouraged when one of the guys would get assigned to me, right? Because they'd be like, oh, shit, I got the girl, I got the girl instructor. And when he couldn't keep up with me, it was fantastic, because then he started to realize, oh, it's not about that she's a female, it's in their head, we're either not as fast or not as good. There's just this misconception or maybe a stereotype. I don't know. But, I got really fast and I decided to, start racing. So even in racing, there wasn't very many females. So there was this gap, and I just felt like if I can do this and I can start an organization, that other women would follow. And through the years, I mean, in 10 years, I think the numbers of just a handful now are a dozen or more at every track day. So it's phenomenal. It's grown significantly.
Mhm. I love that. And, I think what I really love about when we are women in male dominated environments is that they underestimate us. And
Greatly.
that sometimes is a good thing because, it's like you said, it's kind of fun to be like, oh, really? You think I can't handle this? Okay, watch this, So I find that fun. I found that a lot of times when I was playing sports with guys, like, oh, great, here's a girl, and then they'd hit a at me really hard and I'd dig him and call him a girl. And then they'd be like, oh, okay, well, maybe you can hold your own. Um, and I think it's just culturally, I mean, now let me just say, I don't mind a big, strong guy any day of the week. Like, I don't come on over. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah.
But, having the ability to open the door in other places like this, motorcycle racing, when I think about you doing stunts and I was on your website and I was seeing like all these shows you've been on, I'm like, okay, wait, was that her on the motorcycle in, this show? Cause I was looking at like 911. We watched that show. Wait, is it 911? And then SWAT and some other ones. And I was like, wait, was that her on the motorcycle? Like, what episode was that? And I just love that you didn't let age in at that time of your life, your age stop you. And that's not, you weren't old by any means, but you know what I mean? Like I
Uh,
like you.
but it's just perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because by other people's perspective, I'm old. At 40 something years old to be starting, something completely new and
Yeah.
become an entrepreneur, number 1, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, do all the stuff that I was doing in my 40, not in my 20s, but in my 40s. Yeah.
Yeah.
People thought I pretty much lost my mind.
I love that. I had moments of that too. When I was transitioning to different things in my life, I thought to myself, maybe I'm having a midlife crisis. Like, because like you, culturally, I, got married, had kids, good wife, good mom. And I'm still a good mom. But it was one of those things that, like, for example, people would say to me when I moved into these big positions, how does your husband feel about you working such a big position? And I'd be like, he doesn't mind the money,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they say stuff like, "Well, how do you feel about someone else raising your children and you not being home to do it?" And I'm like, "There isn't anyone else raising my children. Just because they have a babysitter doesn't mean that they're raising." And I would get these questions and you'd feel what I call kind of that guilt,
Guilt.
right? Like,
Yeah.
"Oh gosh, well, maybe I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be," And so when I was doing that transition, there was a lot of naysayers and it wasn't my husband. My husband was fantastic. He's like, "Hey, you want to go make more money? You want to do that? I don't care. Like, go have fun." I mean, those are the best guys who are like, "Oh, you want to make a lot of money?
Have you seen Ellie Wong's, comedy show about that?
Oh my gosh, I haven't, but I need to."
Okay, watch it. I'm not gonna discuss more on the podcast about it. People that wanna watch it, but she talks about being the breadwinner of the family, and it's pretty funny.
Yeah. And I just look at this stuff and I think to myself too, uh, you know, how did I get that courage later in life, right? I took a lot of very calculated risk when I was younger. Like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is safe. This will and you talk about this in your TED talk and also on your website, about wanting your family to be proud and you don't want them to be disappointed. And I definitely can relate to that, even though obviously we're from different cultures. I had that same thing too. It was very important that my family was proud of me and that I did the right thing, and it was just a cultural thing. It was just part of the cultural norm of growing up. And so when I did get to that point in my life of like, writing my first book that was really raw and authentic and honest, it was kind of like, I don't know if I want them to read this. Right? It was like, but I got to write it because I've got to write it for other women. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's where you were at, when you moved into this.
Well, my mom had passed away when I was much younger, right? So, and she was really the only person that I really cared about, her opinion, right? And in our culture, it everything is based around honoring the family. So everything you said, everything you did. I mean, the disapproving looks you would get if you dressed inappropriately in any way, and their idea of inappropriate was just showing skin in any way, right? And I grew up in California. I was born in Los Angeles. What'd you expect? We're all in like bikinis and tank tops and camisoles. And, I mean, we're young.
Yeah.
So you don't even think about it, right? But it was just everything was about honoring the family. And they wanted me in a profession. And it's kind of a stereotype, but everybody in the Chinese culture, it's either doctor or lawyer, right? Your
Mhm.
child's either a doctor or lawyer, and then everybody goes, oh my God. And that's why I studied to be a doctor. I mean, it took 4 years of Latin in high school, a dead language, right? But why
Yeah.
did I do it? Because of med school. It helps, right? Because of the root language.
Yeah.
And it it's so strange when your parent, who's the one that's your driving force to, be in a profession that you're not really sure you wanna be in, but you really just want acceptance and approval from them. That's basic human nature. Everybody wants to be accepted and, have that feeling of approval. But when she passed away, I was just kind of like, "Yeah, you know what? This is really not my dream."
Hmm.
So, the people that mattered in my life were no longer there, right?
Mhm.
And my brother's younger than me, so really, I was the one that always set the example for him, and he got to do whatever he wanted,
Mm.
and here was me my whole life, being the perfect daughter. I just decided, "Okay, well, at this point, nobody around me, in my family is here to be disapproving, so let me just go do something I wanna do."
Yeah.
And that's what happened, and it turned out to be truthfully an awakening,
Mm.
and it wasn't some like, people always ask, like, "Okay, so how did you get into that? Why did you get into that?" I don't have a why I got into it. It was almost instinctual. I really wanna do this. Who knew I was gonna become so passionate about it and wanna make a business out of it?
Yeah. Well, and I read in here that the MotoVixens, that you started partnering with some really big groups as well. What were some of those groups that you partnered with?
You mean, like, other organizations and coaches and
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
like
so
as it's grown, over the
yeah,
years.
we've worked with all different types of renowned coaches, that have been great racers. Jason Pridmore is one, and his dad was Reggie Pridmore, and he was a oh gosh, I'm going to say this wrong. I think he was a British Superbike champ.
Mm.
So he has the legacy, the lineage. I don't know. He inherited all those talents. He's an
Yeah.
incredible rider. I also got paired up with WRMRA, which is Washington Motorcycle Road Racing Association. And so we do all kinds of things with different groups through the years. And now for us, we've decided to step away from, everybody and do things on our own because
Mm.
it's really hard to take everybody's ideas and incorporate them. And it's not that we think ours is better or, I think our culture is what stands out in our group.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. And I want to touch a little bit on, how did you get into acting? I see you have films and television that you've been on here, and I'm just curious. I know you're doing motorcycles. I know you also wanted to shoot guns and are shooting guns. How did acting get pulled into this whole world that you were working in?
Uh, it happened. It's funny what happens in your life when you start to open yourself up, and we talked about risk, right? And safety and risk in that TED Talk. And I had always believed that I should always take the safe route. The safe route was going to be the route that would lead me to a great life. But I realized that wasn't the route. And so taking the chance was what allowed the world to open up to me,
Mhm.
because then I saw things from a different perspective. And then instead of feeling like I was in a box, which I always felt like I was in a box, the world was just full of possibilities. I couldn't even believe all the things that were kind of coming to me. It was bizarre. So I never said no. I just said,
Mm.
okay, and just
And
kind of went with it.
that's just how, like, I love how, like, casual you are about that. You're like, "Yeah, I just said yeah," and then I was acting like most people would be, in my opinion, like, hyperventilating, like, "What? Oh my god," and I love your openness of just like, "Let's do it," and I relate to that because people would offer me stuff a lot of times. I'd be like, "Do you have a book on it? Like, can I read how to do it?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." I'd be like, "Okay, I'm in," and I had a friend say to me one time, "I could never do that. Like, that would be terrifying to me," and I'm like, "Well, worst thing that happens, it doesn't work, but why
Exactly.
not?" You
Worst
know?
thing that happens is you fail. So what?
Yeah,
Right? I'm
yeah,
not afraid of failure.
and I think that's the key thing though, right? Is that we have to get to this point in our lives. When I was young, failure was a big deal for me. What people thought of me was a big deal. We talk about this imposter syndrome. We talk about wanting to impress everyone. Like this is culturally what we're expected, right? We have to look a certain way, we have to act a certain way. And that was definitely a huge part of that. When I hit that point in my life where I was like, okay, this is exhausting. I can't do this anymore. This isn't me,
'Cause
right?
it
And then
wasn't authentically you, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember thinking to myself, right, we get our identity tied up in things, right? So my identity was tied up in this job. And I was like, okay, so the job goes away. Who am I? Like,
Yeah.
what do I want to do? And I was part of me was frustrated that I was like 40 something years old in my life and going like, what do I want to do with my life? Wait, I thought I knew I wanted to do with my life. And
Right.
then it was suddenly like, but this isn't me. I hate this. And I think a lot of women have this epiphany because culturally we follow the path that's expected of us. And
Yes.
for some women, that's great. That works for you. But for other women, it's like, I can still be a mom and a wife and still also be a badass. Like that's
Yes.
like I can still do that. Like I feel like they think it has to be separate. Like either you can have this or this, but you can't have both. And I'm like, I can have both. And it was that moment of kind of like you said, an awakening of going like, wait, wait, wait. I don't have to give up this to have this. Like, why can't I have both? And failure now is really the best. I'm always like, let's just fail and get it done so we can move on and figure out how to do it right.
Yeah.
You
Fail
know, but
fast,
I'm,
fail big.
but I look at my 14-year-old daughter and God bless her, she's in 8th grade. Worst time of my life. If I could remember worst time of my life, 7th and 8th grade were the worst time. Like I'm 45 now and I think about 7th, 8th grade and I still go like, oh, in 8th grade, right? And that's that time where, like, I feel for young women, they're so unsure about themselves, they're so worried, they're trying to figure out, and I constantly like, "Don't worry about it, who cares about that?" But they do, and
Well,
now in
it's
my life, I'm
hard.
like, I'm so glad I'm at a point that I'm like, "I don't care. If you don't like me, I don't care." You know? If you don't like what I do, I don't care, and there's some freedom in that,
There is.
freedom of just saying, like, this is who I wanna be, and if you don't like it, fine. You don't have to come along. And I love that, and I love that you were just like, "Yeah, acting happened, it happened in my life, and, there it is." I started riding motorcycles. I love to shoot guns, so I have to ask. So, how did you I mean, when you're thinking about getting into guns, same thing, did you run into these stigmas? Were you like, "I'm just gonna go learn guns?" Like, how did you integrate that in?
Did you know the reason I went to go learn to shoot was I was a single mother and
Mm,
I had 2 children. And I'm like, I'm not going to be afraid and not be able to protect my babes, right? Even
yeah,
though they were teenagers, they aren't really babies. They were even taller than me. So
yeah.
whatever, but they're still my babies, right? So that's why I went to do it. And I didn't know I would like it so much for Pete's sake. It was awesome, right? But it's a little bit, oh my God, I'm going to say this and everybody's going to hate me for saying this, but I'm still going to say it because, like you said, you reach a point where you don't care. Um, it's a lot like the motorcycle world. When they see a female that comes into that realm or that area or whatever, right? Whether it's motorcycling, whether it's shooting guns, everybody wants to give you advice and teach you how. As if I'm not capable, right? But same thing with guns. I love that it took such intense focus. I love that it requires a certain finesse, and people think of guns and they just think it's just shooting, but there really is a finesse. Like when you pull the trigger on the exhale, there is this smoothness, right? And yeah, the
Mhm.
gun jerks a little bit, but typically if you're just nice and smooth, it hits the target every time. And there was just something really cool about that. Same thing with motorcycles. I mean, the 2 were pretty much in line, which is why I ended up gravitating towards both of them. But
Yeah.
most people that ride motorcycles, I don't know if you know this, also shoot guns. And
Hmm.
that's part of a training thing we did at, like, the Texas Tornado Boot Camp,
Mhm.
it's Colin Edwards Boot Camp. We
Mhm.
would spend the day, like, in the morning riding, flat tracking, I should say, and then we would stop, shoot guns.
Gosh, yeah,
And
it's
then we
just
get back and ride again. And it
y
was like it was crazy. It was like the best of both worlds. There's just no way that, he had the perfect formula.
oh my gosh, you're like my peoples, all right? Like, we need to spend more time together. This is my people. Well, I got into shooting compound bow, and
I
same thing,
love that.
a friend showed me, and it was so awesome and so powerful, and like you said, it took so much precision, and it was just I loved it, and I got really good at it, and, I love
Is
doing
there
it now.
anything you're not really good at if you put your mind to?
Yeah, like, I'm so bad at making an omelet, like, if I could just get, like, Gordon Ramsay to come on in and yell at me a little bit, like, "Is that how you make an omelet?" Um, just this I need a little help on that. But, but I love that, and there's just some freedom in that. I feel like there's just
It's
freedom in being
empowering.
able, yeah, to have the power to, and I don't wanna say not to be dependent on anyone, because I have wonderful people that I depend on in my life, but I think I wanted that freedom and power to know that I could do it
Yeah,
on my own,
yeah.
because my grandmother, God bless her, my grandfather passed away, when we were young kids, and she would say, "Listen, you've gotta find something for you because you're not always gonna have a husband to take care of you." And she would always say that to me all the time, and it really stuck with me. And I remember going to school and thinking about, like, what can I do that if I didn't have anyone else, I could still exist? And that's where that whole identity thing came in of, like, my identity now isn't in my husband or in my kids. They are part of my life because they're so important to me, but they're not my identity because I don't need them to be my identity.
Right.
And so, and that's where I find a lot of women get wrapped up in. And so there's a couple other questions I want to ask you as we come to the end of this. So one is, obviously we talked, there's a lot of women who are going through this phase in life. I have girlfriends who are in the midst of divorce. Their kids have gone off to college and they're suddenly like, I have no purpose. What do I do with my life now?
Yeah.
Just these transitions in life. So what is some advice that you would give to women who are facing these crossroads like you did of, like, where do I go?
I don't know, everybody's situation is different. For me, it was just following my heart, and my heart was, "You know what? I don't wanna live the same life again for the next 20 years." So, open yourself up to see what you might, be interested in, because you never know, one of those interests may end up, sending you down the rabbit hole, and you end up becoming an entrepreneur later in life also, and very successful. Who knows, right? The options are endless, but just, you know, I think you just fall into it. When everything is right, everything just freely happens and flows to you.
Mm. Yeah, and I like that, being open. Sometimes we can be really stubborn and be really closed about things.
Or scared.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
never let fear,
Mhm.
be the reason you don't do something,
Oh,
because I was deathly afraid of motorcycles, but I still went and did it. I'm still afraid of my motorcycle. Every so often, I'm like, I talk to it. I'm like, "Don't kill me today, please."
and you're right. Fear is so powerful. And I think about things I do all the time that I'm absolutely terrified to do. And I'm talking to myself on the way to that going like, "Julie, you can do this. You're gonna be fine.
The
You can do,"
pep
I mean, I
talk.
don't know about anyone else. They say like you're crazy if you talk to yourself. I talk to myself. But sometimes I gotta talk myself right into that situation, be like, "You got this. Go in, do it," you know? So I agree with that. The fear, like we said, the worst thing that happens is you fail,
Mhm.
you know, and I don't think that's the end of the world. I mean, that's how we build character.
Yes.
Um, and my last question to you is if you could go back to your younger self and tell your younger self something or give your younger self advice, what would you say to them?
Can I curse?
Sure. We're an
This
adult
is
show.
this is actually in my book. Zero shits, give zero shits. If I could tell my younger self anything, stop giving a shit
Mm,
because you worry about what people think of you. You worry about, whether you're going to make enough money, if you're going to whatever. All those worries are things you can't control at that moment. And other people's opinion of you, who cares?
mhm,
And as you and I both know, Dan, he
mhm,
tells me a story over and over again about Tony Robbins.
mm.
If you don't got haters, then you're not doing anything.
Yeah. It's such good advice and it's so true. And I wish I could have told my younger self that. It used to bother me so much when someone didn't like me. I mean, I lost sleep over it.
Oh, we
And
all did.
I look back at it now and I think they were just insecure. They just,
Yeah.
they were taking out on me something that had nothing to do with me. It was their life. And I'm thankful that I can give that advice to younger women. I mean, I look at our youth and I think, God, if you and I can take our experiences and help these young women to give them that advice that we wish we could have given ourselves, right? Like who cares? Who stinking cares, right? And move them along so they don't have to deal with half that stuff. I think, what could I have done if I had known that at 20, right?
Oh
Like,
God,
where
so
would I
much,
be in my life right now?
so much further ahead. But we
Yeah.
didn't. And it was also, and you have to remember too, it was a different time. I
Mhm.
mean, when I was growing up, it was a different time
Yeah.
altogether. So things were very different. And I
Yeah.
wish I had known so much more then.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go, I want to make sure that anyone who wants to get a hold of you, find you, follow you can do that. So what is the best way for someone to find you? Is it social media, your website? Where should they go?
Oh my gosh. Probably if it's one place, carolcarpentermedia.com, and it just lists everything, and there's an inquiry button and it'll send me an email and I'll reach out. I'll reach back out. My phone number is actually on there too, so they can literally text me or call me.
You're so bold. Oh my gosh. I get such weird texts. Well, that is and I know you're a speaker. Obviously, you do all these amazing things. Also, as we're, do you still do stunt driving? Are you still in films? Or are you more just
Off
focusing
and
on
on.
MotoVixens? So off and on. Is
Yeah.
there anything coming up for you that we can keep a lookout for?
Well, we started doing the Titan Evolution podcast
Yeah.
last year,
Mhm.
and then me and Travis Johnson, and then I have Iron Dog Media as well,
And
and
then
it's a
was
media
there something
company.
about a reality show or something I saw on your
It's
website?
upcoming. Yep,
Oh my
yep.
goodness. Okay. So what does that have a title? Like when do we know when we should look for that?
Not yet,
Okay, not
not
yet.
yet.
So we just
No,
gotta
no.
keep checking. So
Yeah, and then also an executive producer for a film that's upcoming also. So
oh my goodness. Okay, so we're just gonna have to we're just gonna have to keep visiting your stuff. So everyone needs to keep visiting it. And last thing, what is the title of your book and best place to find it?
oh, The Elegant Disruptor, and it's on Amazon.
Okay, awesome. And if you're listening right now and you're driving, don't worry, we will put all these links in here so you can go back and check on them later. Thank you so much for being on the show and being so honest and transparent. As I always say, live, love, laugh, and always be your authentic self.